So everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining Food and Peace under COVID-19, our third in a series of presentations for Rotarians and Rotary Peace Fellows. And the purpose is to share and learn about the effects of COVID-19 on the many peace-building issues we are working on. So before we begin, I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. So I would just like to pay respects to my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which I reside. Even though this webinar is digital, I acknowledge that I'm residing, that the Wurundjeri people are the traditional custodians of the land, and I pay respects to elders past and present. So today our goal is to use this pandemic to create opportunities, to generate ideas and action steps that we can take back to our communities, to our clubs, on how to engage with food and the food system in a more just, peace and sustainable way. So as we wait for the final registrants to join us, could you please use the chat box to introduce yourself, so where you're joining us from. Also feel free to use the chat box for comments and questions, and the administrator will be muting everyone until the main talks are over. If time allows, after the presentations, we might have a few questions. Otherwise, we'll leave it to the end. So do note that we'll be recording today's session. So for those who can't attend, and we'll send you a link once this webinar is over. So by way of background, my name is Elaine Pratley, and I'll be your host today. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow, and I completed my Peace Fellowship at Chulalongkorn University in 2011. I am a lawyer by trade, and I've worked with the New Zealand government in international aid and development. Currently, I'm pursuing a PhD at the University of Melbourne, focusing on food and peace building. So today, as you know, we want to explore some key themes in relation to food and peace, particularly in light of COVID. So within only a matter of weeks, COVID-19 has triggered an economic crisis and rapidly laid bare the underlying inequities and fragilities in the global food system. I'm sure you've read many reports. You've probably had news overload, but in one report from the World Food Programme has warned that the world is facing, I quote, multiple famines of biblical proportions that could result in 300,000 deaths per day. There are currently 821 million food insecure people in the world, and the hunger pandemic is expected to eventuate in a matter of months. And I believe most of you have read this, which is why many of you are here on the call today. So food as a topic is a very broad area of study. It touches every aspect of life. We don't intend to cover everything. We only have time to highlight a few issues on how to build peace through food. So I won't be introducing our speakers in detail. You can read about their bios in the Eventbrite introduction. But Savinch, she's a food security expert. She will be talking about how COVID has exacerbated food insecurities. Spencer Leong will be giving a quick overview on what we mean by the term food system. So if you're not familiar with food studies or food research, he'll talk about the food systems. And Mark will be getting a bit more practical on how food-related businesses can help change narratives in conflict. Tanya was unfortunately unable to join us today, but I'll share some stories from our Peace Fellow community on how food brings people together. Food, I mentioned, is a topic that impacts everyone because everyone must eat. Everyone is involved in food in some way. In some ways, food is an issue that touches on all of the Rotary's 6 areas of focus. We are hoping after today, everyone feels more equipped to become food citizens, who can vote with their forks and spoons in making informed food choices. Ultimately, we want to feed people, feed peace, not landfills. So in terms of today's agenda, the presenter will be giving a very brief overview on their topic, just 4 minutes initially, a key message that they want to convey to you. Then we will be asking them to share as a panel some ideas on how to build peace through food. We'll then give you some time to discuss in small groups, and you'll have a facilitator in each of the breakout rooms. That will go for 25 minutes, and then we'll come back and share as a group. So without delay, let's turn to Sevinç Demirci in Turkey. She is with us here live, but due to unpredictability of bandwidth, she's pre-recorded her message, but she will be with us live in the discussion part. She'll also join us to speak to you live after her message. So we'll now take a look at that.
COVID brings new food safety challenges. Food security now requires higher food safety standards and trust building buyers and sellers, and also will result the changing eating habits. As you know, COVID has sharpened the focus on issues of food access and demanding now radical change to how the supply system works. I'd like to today give you a supply and demand side, and mainly for the supply side, food producer and suppliers now ensure their employees have frequent medical checkup, and the producer meet certification standards demonstrating that they have food safety check in place. And they have to, the producer and suppliers, they have to build trust within their customer and also develop more ways of the communication to sustain their own business. When we look at now the demand side, the COVID affected demand side as well. So as a consumer, we also changed our habits, such as now we started to challenging our eating habits to eat locally sourced and fresh produce rather than frozen meal. And also we started to eat products that have minimal processing step to have minimized the risk, health risk. And also we are assuming they might have loss of COVID-19 related urban to rural migration, then will encourage self-sufficiency and self-production of our own food. Also for the, of course, the rural enterprise side, the online food shopping will be very popular, and then this requires technical improvement. This may be encourage the rural young people to have the agribusiness on the online shopping. So overall, COVID brings us the new food safety and eating habits. Thank you.
So now we'll turn to Sevinç live.
Hi everybody, welcome to our section. Due to internet connection, I give just briefly, but I'm here to any question come to food security, because in this video I just explain you utilization of the food and then availability of the food with the supplies and demand side, and I'm holding if you have any question after the section. Thank you.
So feel free to put the questions in the chat box and we'll turn to those later. So now we'll turn to Spencer Leong in Thailand. He will talk about the food systems.
Thank you, Elaine. Can you everyone hear me all right? Yeah, good, thank you.
Yes.
Let me share my screen here. Give me a moment here. Okay. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to very quickly talk about the supply chain on the food system and supply chain. As Elaine and Sevinç mentioned in here, food is very important. Without food, we're not able to survive. And how food can come about to bring it to the consumers for us to eat We just have to give a very high level overviews on the whole thing. But before I look into it, let's look at the world populations. We are kind of lucky. After the World War II, the World War, the whole world is gradually, the population gradually increasing more and more. And of course, we're facing a lot of challenge in here. By 2050, we're facing kind of like close to 10 billions of people. The supply chain is a very linear system. From fruit productions, get a package, process, distributed, get into retailers, into the consumers, and finally to the tables in here. This is a very standard supply chain in here. But this is a very simplified one in here. But if you look at the global system in here, much more complex. The food systems comprised of over 30% of the world economies in here. There are many actors and players in the industries, including ITs in here. The recent COVID has addressed a lot of these issues in here. There are food shortage in some countries once the logistic is stopped in between, in somewhere in here. So throughout the supply chain and at the same time, we see a lot of atrocities for years and years in here. And people are not treating humanely. And the factory productions in here is addressing all these people. In the production side in here, we're faced with a lot of challenges, forest fire in Australia and many places, you name it in here. So the whole food system is not very stable and it can be very fragile. The future of food and agriculture is very challenging. As mentioned in here, there'll be close to 10 billion people we need to feed. And 2/3 of them will be living in the urban areas. Massive deforestations and land degradations in here. The climate change has caused kind of like 500 million of people has been affected by different natural crises in here. The pests and diseases are transboundaries. And recently, as some of you may know in here, that we have kind of like a hornet in the United States, which never come across before. All along, we have massive inequalities. Currently, over 700 million people are still living in extremely poor. And strangely enough, or ironically enough, we have it, we're wasting 1/3 of the food, and many countries are overweight, and yet many countries are malnutrition. We look at the needs of the Maslow things in here. And I totally believe if we can address the 17th SDG, United Nations SDG, would take care of the biosphere, the society, economy, through collaborations in here, we can address all the needs of the humans and in the peaceful societies in here. To conclude in here, there are over kind of like 570 million worldwide. Over 80% of global food supplies are produced by the smallholders farmers. But they are still living in a very less than $2 per day per person in the rural areas in here. What I like to call upon is for everyone globally to invest in smallholders farmers, organic regenerative agricultures, and the local food productions and distribution systems, and be mindful when you have food on the tables, and do your best to be social inclusivities for all the stakeholders along the food chain. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thanks, Spencer. Now we'll turn to Mark, based in Australia, but talking about his business social enterprise in Timor-Leste. Mark?
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks for organising the seminar, and to Rotary as well. I'm really liking this fast pace, so I'm going to skip the bit where I say who I am, a lot of details about that, and about the country that we're working in, which is Timor-Leste. I can see some friends from Dili who are also on the chat tonight. Hi to everyone. We're from the Timor-Leste Food Lab, and we're working sort of in the space of food, but in a country that would be described as conflict prone. And Timor-Leste, or East Timor, most of its food is imported, although most people are farmers growing food and coffee. So, and there's 40% roughly food insecurity there. And the question that was put to us through this webinar tonight was, what are our experiences using food as a tool for social good and for peace? So I wanted to talk a bit about how we're trying to change the narrative from conflict and focusing on food. But before I do that, I will just share a short snippet from a video that's been done recently about what we're doing. We'll watch about the first 2.5, 3 minutes of that, and then I want to make a few points. So just give me a sec while I share my screen.
Timor-Leste ia café nebe capaz no hahang nebe pura.
Aihan lokal nebe Timor yang primeiro tambah aihan lokal hanya sang identidade ida. Laos de hanya sang fating, laos de hanya sang kultura maksa hanya sang identidade, nebe hanya sang identidade lokal itu. Jadi hanya sang geração fom interaksi agora haré da hanya sang teknologi nebe moderno tebes itu haré agora ada kan geração fom barak mak koko atu halu hanya tanya hahang nebe mak atu lakon hanya sang kumbili hanya sang koto tisi kali ya buat barak nebe mak kita koko atu lakon hutona i jovem barak mak começa halu hana atau agora fixude koko para hakarak promove idane para di mundo mus belatan yang kata Timor ia mos hahang nebe unik nebe sira iha para mundo belatan yang kata Timor mus ia hahang nebe persijatu promove.
Daun Timor ida orgulho tebe serviço ia fatilane tambah fatindane nebe promove hahang lokal. So idane mos parte ba ida kata promove hahang lokal no promove mos tenis sans nebe uniku ba usa.
Ya mudança ida bahau mak hanya sang wahira serviço ne como antes how hatene hanya sang oinsa teing itu fila de modo mebe how hatene ang sa oinsa tu kombinação bahahang kasi oinsa tu teing oinsa tu halo teste bahahang oinsa tu combina oinsa tu serve hahang ne bahe cliente mebe wahira serviço que hene ma ofrin hatene botira kerma sa menciono when hira tu serve hahang when hira tu teing hanya sang chef when hira teing laos de kita teing nebe te persijamos hatene koko hahang nebe iterasi teing
Quando hawa serviço no hau hetan ema nebe mentoring dia bahau kata turu bat fo bahau liga ba saida maka na sound na iya antang iya na bahau re ba area nebe maka iya maka sektor kafe tambah ita halai ba kafe iya hau na area suku darulete município Likisa, e a quase população mora no café. Então, com iniciativa da Cata, how tem que serviço para ele, né? Para o futuro, how benefício faliba, atu halo badruma yang nefate. Lema how o serviço na banha area barista, no lorong halo café, depois teste café, no aprende os mos colegas selo, no bem marca e conhecimento do café.
So, hi, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
yes
So I'm just having, sorry, a bit of trouble here. Okay, so thanks for that. Sorry about that. So basically, we just wanted to show a snippet of what we've been doing, and just I wanted to share 3 key points from our particular social enterprise model that might be of use to people who are in the Rotary community who are thinking about using food as a tool to create better more social good and peace in their own clubs and in the countries that they're working in. So the first thing that we wanted to share is that when working with younger people in societies defined as conflict prone, it's really important to focus on the idea of careers, not jobs. And that can help to change the narrative and the labels that we use to describe young people. So typically in such countries, people are described as being unemployed or being lazy or being violent or involved in gangs. And what happens in employing people, but with a career focus, is they start to refer to themselves and their families and people around them start to refer to them as things linked to food, like cooks and chefs, baristas, could be drivers, could be working in HR, could be traders, it could be in a range of areas in hospitality and tourism. And those old labels start to fade away. And so that's our sort of first experience in terms of changing the narrative. The second one is that using food is a very communal thing, as we know. Rotary itself, you know, a lot of Rotary meetings are built around food, and that's a beautiful thing where we can sort of eat and talk together, and it's a real binding agent. And I think when working in food and coffee and things like that, a lot of hands-on work is really important, because a lot of that's done in teams, and the food and touching things and sorting things and carrying things become an operation where people have to work in teams. And through that working in teams, they develop peace building skills, communication skills. They develop the communication tools that they may not have had because of the way that they've grown up. So we find that that's a little bit of a diversion there. And then the third sort of idea that we want to share is, when working with food and using food as a peace building tool, is it's really important to create a nourishing space and to have nourishing food. I think the evidence on eating well is really clear, and having, you know, good local food. I think Savinch mentioned shorter supply chains. I think in the COVID era or the post-COVID context, that's going to be really important. Working with farmers that we trust and working within a local space as much as possible, which is of course much more sustainable for the planet and addresses what the SDGs that Spencer referred to. And I think as part of that, many of you can Google human-centered design or terms like that to figure out it's really important to create spaces which are really inspiring and encourage innovation and creativity. So that's the opportunity that exists, I think, for Rotary in its own procurement in the future. I don't want to give suggestions on that, but I'm really interested to see in the discussion what comes out from the Rotary clubs and participants here. And I think the other thing about all of those points is that, you know, a lot of people working in Rotary have a business background, and all of those things are much smarter for your business as well. So creating a nourishing space, happier staff, happier team, happier family life potentially. So all those kind of things link. And I just would make a final point about food and the link that we understand now much greater about the link between food and mental health and the gut and things like that. So when we're talking about peace building and we're talking about conflict and a lot of it's in the mind, and food is not only a way to divert from that and to focus attention on something we all love, but it's also a way where stronger physical health is linked to better mental health. So in conclusion, I guess I want to say that we don't always have to talk about reducing conflict and peace building to create peace and reduce conflict. There are other ways to do it in parallel with the more formal mechanisms where talking is important. But I think food is a perfect topic for this. So thanks again to the organizers.
Thank you, Mark. So we've now heard about food insecurity, the food system, and how we can help people develop through more positive stories about themselves through business. I want to now touch briefly on a very obvious point that is often overlooked because it's so mundane, and that is the power that food has to create connection through its symbolic power. And then when you say that, immediately everyone says, of course, that's so obvious. But just to kind of reiterate the point, I want to share two stories from our Peace Fellow community. One is from Jess who is here now, but I'm just going to share her story on behalf of her. And Jess is based in Melbourne, and she shared the story with me about her time in a council in Melbourne when she was involved in interfaith work. And she shares about the interfaith iftar meals they had during Ramadan. So during her time at a local council, her local community was so deeply divided due to a period of anti-mosque demonstrations led by alt-right groups. And as a show of solidarity during the Muslim month of Ramadan, many religious groups, so not just Muslim groups, Christian groups, Hindu groups, politicians, the local community joined the Muslim community as they broke fast. They all shared a joyous meal, it sounds like, and it was a show of solidarity of people of many faiths and political beliefs coming together to show their support for the Muslim community. And for Jess, she talks about the how incredible it was and the basis, the foundation it created for deeper community connections. Similarly, Kieran, who's not here with us right now, he shared with me about a time, a day before the Black Lives Matter protest rally, just before Trump was elected. And Kieran is a peace builder in the US and invited the Republican mayor, the African American clergy, and some young Black Lives Matter activists to his home for an Indian meal. So Kieran, before anyone was allowed to talk shop, he told everyone must eat his Indian curry first. So Indian curry, a meal that many of them were not familiar with, but eating it with their hands. So I'm familiar with eating hands, but for many people around that table that day, it was not only a strange meal, but it was a strange experience. So sharing this novel experience together allowed them to all work together and move forward together, because they had shared this rather unique experience of being delighted, being embarrassed, all these different emotions, and together for that short period, they were united. He tells the rally was a success, and the Republican mayor even went so far as to offer his support to the activists, his support for protection. These are both not unique stories. You have them in your community, you have them in your own personal lives, in your families. But during this COVID period, I'm sure you've heard of many community groups coming together to share food with neighbors, the elderly, refugees. Here in Australia, we have an issue with international students getting no help. And so the community banding together to try and provide food for the international student community. But I also don't want to overstate this rosy picture, because it's often people criticize peace builders for being sounding like overly positive, and it's not true. Peace builders, when we do our job right, we recognize conflict exists, and likewise, I research and work in the food field. I know food can cause conflict. It's a powerful symbol of identity for many people, and often we don't realize this until someone claims your national dish as their own national dish. So a friendly or so-called friendly rivalry between the Australians and Kiwis, and maybe even the English over the pavlova and the hummus in the Middle East. Who owns the hummus? And it might seem almost comical, but when it's your national dish, it's something that almost touches your sense of identity. Also, rejecting someone's food, whether through words or wrinkling your nose in disgust, can cause deep offense and hurt and sometimes derail years of peace building work in a matter of seconds. So the COVID outbreak has also, being less comical, has unfortunately had a very dehumanizing effect in reigniting hidden forms of racism in Australia, and I'm sure in your parts of the world, the xenophobia in framing Chinese people as uncivilized and barbaric others. So food is a powerful tool at bridging divides, but it also requires some mindfulness, cultural intelligence, I believe, and grace at all sides of a conflict. I see many peace builders on this webinar smiling right now. I think some of them are thinking of those moments. So I guess I could be biased, but I would say this is a time to pull in your peace builders or people with who are skilled in facilitating people across divide, if you're not familiar. But also, I don't want to say that this is a matter for experts only, because that is the power of food. Food is something that anyone can use if mindful. So our breakout sessions will be a good opportunity for you to share your own experiences of how you have used food as a connector rather than a divider. Before we do that, I just want to give the panel a chance to share some ideas, some actions that we can take as individuals and Rotary before we turn to our breakout groups. So I'll post the question to the panel, and then we'll go to Savinch, Spencer, and Mark. So what are some actions that we can take as individuals and as Rotary? Savinch?
Actually, as a Rotarian, like you mentioned, we are, food for us is like a united ourselves. So I explained that as an individual we can do more awarenesses, and then likewise you mentioned under the COVID, people going to minimize the process. Their preference is going to be minimize the process and then locally food. So it means self-sufficient society requires. If the self-sufficient society requires, we will easily come to united. What I explained, this is a trust building. So now between customer and producer will unite themselves, and then they produce less processed food and locally produced. That is give the synergy between any conflict in the society. As an individual, yes, we should continue our awarenesses to our society first, and the action is same action we will do. Like now, we arrange one kind of the webinar. We can continue this webinar, and inside our country or inside our society, we will continue the same. Like I think Mark also mentioned, or if he hasn't mentioned yet, like less plastic using, less chemicals. Those are also affected with the climate change. So my suggestion is only to continue that we are doing the awarenesses, and then encourage people, especially young people, encourage this food in peace, and also food like a mental health and well-being. And then, like you explained already, every countries, they have their own identity, and identity is food. So we have to respect. Thank you.
Thanks, Savinch. Spencer? Spencer, I think you're not, you're on mute, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I was saying that as Mark mentioned earlier, Rotary communities all surrounded by food. You meet up the fellowships, on luncheons, you have all these things in here. So may I just call a point in here, because I see a lot of divide, not only in the Western world, pro-Trump, against Trump. Another one in Hong Kong, we have the blue camp and the yellow camp in here. So when people come to the Rotary meetings and having meals, having lunch and have a fellowship in here, let's look about the food in here. We share the same food, eating the same thing, and we can have more mindful. As Elaine mentioned in here, when you're eating the food in here, try to eat organically, because by organic productions in here, it will help a lot in addressing the environmental issues in here. Where they get it from local suppliers, all these things will come along the base. So as I mentioned earlier in here, whenever you come into a food, think about the communities, bringing things together, and look at the divide that we're creating just because our thinking. But coming together, the eating in here, we should share the same plate.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, actions we can take as Rotarians. Look, I think our colleagues have covered it off pretty well. It's trying to build connections over food with your local suppliers, and trying to minimize the use of plastic and styrofoam and the unnecessary waste that's polluting the planet. I don't have much to add, but I will suggest maybe clubs and Rotarians can think about codifying this in maybe just a one-pager of what they want in their when it comes to procuring food for their meetings and the communities they're working with. What are the standards, the sorts of people they want to work with, the sorts of food that they want, making sure that it's healthy and also sustainable. So you're having that as as I guess a guideline, because I've noticed that Rotary has a lot of guidelines for different things that it does about being an ethical organisation. So I think that could be added to those.
Do you want to show your dashboard?
I can show it now, or I can show it after the discussions. I don't mind.
Why don't you show it now? I think.
Okay, hang on one sec.
I mean, yeah.
So, thanks, Elaine. So, yeah, this is a tool that we've developed to, I guess, Spencer mentioned the SDGs before. And in what we've been doing since 2016, we've been trying to track our own progress against the SDGs, which has been really interesting. We didn't really know what we would be able to measure at the start. But ultimately, just on the SDGs, they're a link between food and peace often, if you look at the details of them. And so we've used this as a tool to not only show our community and our team and the people that we serve the impact that we can have as a collective by eating local food and by minimizing the waste around food. But also we use it as a tool to help people that want to eat more ethically find places that are producing more ethical food, let's say. So it's something that is a bit of a beta version, but we want to share it so that other restaurants and other organizations can track their own progress against their SDGs. So it's something that I'm happy to sort of put out there and for other people to copy and emulate and to use for their own purposes. I'll just hone in on a couple of indicators really briefly. These are the top right, you'll see investment in the Timorese agricultural economy. That's in US dollars. I think anyone who's been to Timor knows that the vast majority of food in restaurants is imported, including all the protein and the rice and noodles and things like that. So it's interesting, even though we're a relatively small operation, what a change or what an investment we can make in the local economy over a few years. And that sort of gives people, I guess it helps people to understand that by making that investment as the Rotarian, if you put your money or vote with your fork and put your money where your mouth is, you can actually make a bit of a change. And I think another interesting figure that we weren't really aware of at the start is by simply not serving plastic water or water in plastic bottles, we avoided the use of 22,000 plastic bottles over a 3.5-year period, which I think is quite a powerful statement. So imagine if your Rotary Club or your organization, your business just said, we're going to have a plastic-free policy when it comes to plastic bottles, and you could track that quite easily. Then you can actually use that as a tool to build your organization and attract new members to Rotary, attract new people to your business. So it's just giving metrics and data to what you're already doing. And you can see that it has a powerful change. And again, it's that link between peace and food right there. Yeah, thanks for letting us share that, Elaine.
So we have a few minutes. I'm looking at a question here, Mark, for you. Are there any books or reports that you can recommend to find information about the relationship between food and peace? That's a very, very broad question. And as a researcher, I can tell you definitively that lots of books. But maybe Mark, you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, and I saw Anna's question. I'll send some links after the chat. So I think there's a couple of really good resources generally around eating more sustainable food, which will link automatically to a more peaceful world. So one of those is the Eat Lancet report, LANCET, which is really looking at the future of where our production and consumption need to go, which is what Spencer was talking about earlier. And a lot of that is about moving towards a plant-based diet overall. It's not saying meat is bad, but it's saying that in order to prevent catastrophic climate change, it's something we have to do as a species. So Eat Lancet is a really useful tool, I think. And in terms of some others, let me think about it, and also we'll send some after the chat, but I might throw it back to you, Elaine, because this is something you're working on quite a lot.
I mean, there's a website, John Hopkins, I forgot what this is. If you Google John Hopkins and food systems, they have educational resources and a very easy way of understanding different topics related to food. And that's more from a sustainability point of view. The reason why I say food and peace is such a huge area is because as we touched upon with our different speakers, food and how we understand of peace can be understood very differently. So I've tried to tap into our food security perspective, food sustainability. I've talked about food and interpersonal conflict. There's also other issues of food justice, food sovereignty, and indigenous issues, colonization. So there's a lot of issues to kind of tap into. So it depends on whether you're wanting to go from a food sustainability point of view or understanding what is peace, which is the basis of my PhD, and it never seems to be ending right now. So I think when people enter the food area, often it's a food sustainability perspective, but there's lots. And if you wanted to ask about food security, there's Savage or food systems and food sustainability. The experts are with us today. I've also got this one question from Maria, but I would like to hear some examples of roles that peace builders can play when conflict disrupts the food supply, resulting in food insecurity. So maybe Savage, you might so how can peace builders help when conflict disrupts food supply, resulting in food insecurity?
This is actually, we are working on it. I don't have the clear answer on that, but maybe during our discussion, we have section. Maybe our colleague will come up some kind of roles. But at the moment, what is our assumption is when we do locally produce, everything is started from the sharing, economic stability and instability. So when we produce our food within the community, we have the buyers and we have the sellers. So when you have these buyers and sellers, you have the relationship. This is that relationship, because customer has to buy from you because you are only outside, because of the COVID at the moment, you are only depending on your society's food and you have to work together. So it means that mandatory or that pressure also gives you an opportunity to work together. So the buyers and sellers, they have to come together. Even if they have a past, if they have had any conflict, now have to be resolved and they have to work together. So that, to me, our role is to encourage and to promote the relationship between the customer and seller, and then try to help to build this synergy. Like we said, when we procure something with the Rotary or our activities, we should consider for the locally seeds, production, and then the selling inside the society. At the moment, I don't have like a clear answer, but I will just give this. Thank you so much.
Elaine, maybe I can chip in a little bit very quickly in here. We have peace fellows in Chiang Rai, in northern Thailand. You know, his family is running a farm. He's turning into all organic productions in here. And during this COVID crisis in here, that was the farm productions in here, he just donate all the food they produce us to the communities. Over in Bangkok in here, in Thailand in here, we have such a kind of like inequalities. Bangkok, for information, has been locked down. So many places, you know, are very restricted. And it's not going to affect people like maybe you and me and in this area. Is the underprivileged people, the people living in the poverty lines. When they have to stop working, they have no food to eat. They have no money to buy food. And all around the Thailand, in Bangkok, especially in here, there are many local restaurants, chefs, using the kitchens to cook food and just donate it to the community to eat in here. There are a lot of these things in here. Another thing, maybe we can look into the other way around in here. Okay, food and peace. But at the same time, is they are not linear. is complex, right? We have the environment issues. You know, back to the history, we have Irish people moving to America because they have a famine. They cannot have the food. And if you look at in here, that the many conflicts are created when people have nothing to eat. You know, that's created the dilemma in here. It's something I want to share with all.
Yeah, so I think now's a great time to break out into our various small group discussions. Please stay around if you can. So we'll be breaking into groups of around 6 to hear your thoughts and generate some ideas, since we're people of action. We'll be breaking out into groups led by Rotary Peace Fellows, and they will facilitate the session. After the session, or during the session, you'll be asked 3 questions, and Bill posted the questions in the chat box. What are your experiences in relation to food as a tool for peace? Actions you can take as a club or as an individual, and how can Rotary or Peace Fellows support you? So the facilitators will reconvene in 25 minutes. When you return, can you please paste a summary of your discussions in the chat box? But when we come together to share, I'll start with getting each facilitator to share just 1 point. If we have more time, we can go through the various points. So see you in 25 minutes. For multitasking, I think I gave you a pretty tough job today of multitasking in many, many ways. So I'll get everyone to, well, the facilitators to share 1 point each from your group. And if we have time, we'll come back to the groups. So we'll start with Anna.
Hi. So we had a wonderful discussion. Thank you for giving us so much great information and ideas to discuss. And we mostly focused on the role of Rotary, but also on how food can connect us to different communities within our cities or locales. It can help build a better connection in terms of reaching out to diverse communities and diverse food cultures within our cities or our towns, but also can attract potentially new members into our community if Rotary clubs are inviting people for meals, preparing meals, celebrating, for example, days that are important, like breaking fast with Muslim communities during Ramadan, all sorts of different ideas for how it can both connect and hopefully widen and diversify the Rotary communities at the club level and even at the district level. And so I really thought that was the big point that came out of our group.
Thank you. We'll move to Young, but before I do so, can I just ask the facilitators in the meantime to just add your summary into the chat box? We're going to collate all these comments into a brief summary to send out to everyone on the call tomorrow. So if you could do that while you're waiting. And if anyone else has comments or questions, please note it in the chat box. If we have time, we'll turn to those. So we'll turn to Young.
We had some very significant examples that's been shared about how food has contributed to restoring peace and reconciliation in parts, in war-torn countries like Sierra Leone and Uganda, Nigeria. Our discussion revolved around periods after the Civil War and how the community had lost everything, including seeds, which then became really difficult for people to grow and feed themselves. So there was an idea that the seeds would be collected and shared amongst the community, and because of that process, everybody worked together to farm to ensure that they had a good crop in order to feed the community. And from that, gradually they were able to grow enough food to sell and make some income for the community. So in a way, it brought the community together out of conflict, and also had some reconciliation efforts involved in that as well. There were other examples that was shared with the Ethiopian community in Tasmania, where Rotary has helped develop like a community garden, and also engaging youth in Nigeria to help with communities in conflict in some of the poorest areas and the poorest regions in Nigeria. So I'll leave it there, and if we have time, I can come back and share some more.
Thank you. So we'll turn to Kathy. You're on mute.
All right, hi, thank you. So our group had a great discussion as well. I mean, we took a look at that, you know, food was a crucial foundation for peace. It was, you know, the first thing on Maslow's hierarchy, you know, of needs, and that it would be easy to engage folks on a discussion and sort of a, you know, a what to do about this, you know, next steps. So we had talked about Rotarians and Peace Fellows coming together to form a group to take a look at potential projects. And the more we talked about this, we took a look at really, you know, cutting out the middleman, buying food from farmers, women's cooperatives, and taking a look at Rotarians both as consumers and making decisions about food, but also as Rotarians, as the Rotary clubs. So we talked about taking a look at setting policies and practices, you know, regionally, right, around how Rotary uses food and where they get food, and what the policies and practices they want to support would be around moving forward on that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, great. Jen from Group 4.
Yeah, we had a great discussion in Group 4, and we talked a lot about the situation and examples from Colombia and also Bangladesh of food being used, the identities around food being used to build common identities from people who might be potentially on opposite sides of conflict or peace, and also in disaster situations, food being used to empower, to build hope that you know you're okay when there's food commonality going around. As part of that conversation, we recognize the deep importance of supporting local food structures and building those, and how that goes hand in hand often with peace building as well. So our main point, I think, is the thing that we want to ask of everyone, ourselves and everyone, is, and especially Rotary, given Rotary's position, is to support and promote local and organic farming initiatives wherever you are and wherever that may be. So it links into what some of the other groups were also thinking as the one thing that we can do. And I want to recognize Martin was taking notes for us, and he drew this amazing piece of artwork that summarized our conversation. He's typing it into bullet points right now into the chat box, but you should try to get that artwork from him.
I'm sure, yeah, thank you. And Spencer from Group 5. You're on mute, Spencer.
Okay, I said we have Priyanka. We're going to share what we're talking about. We'll discuss about.
Spencer's given me the responsibility to share, so I'll just happily take it up. We were just talking in terms of, you know, food production going down in the aftermath of conflict, and even now food distribution. Spencer was talking about how it's the people who are wage workers who are the ones who are definitely suffering with food security right now, more than people like all of us. And I was also thinking that the inequalities that have been existing in our communities and our societies have become much more glaring now because of COVID. So what can be done? It's like, one is definitely in terms of working with our local Rotary groups and seeing what we can do with them. And one of the things was about locally sourcing food for our meetings. But the other point was about stopping plastic water bottles completely across all Rotary meetings, because that's just not about a question about plastic, but also a bigger question about asking where does the water come from, because water is also a source of conflict. So that can be tied into it. But mainly it's about really finding ways to work with our local Rotary clubs and influencing them, and finding ways to navigate through that. And Murray from Melbourne said that Rotary definitely has many grants now for around the time of addressing needs during the pandemic. So those could be possible mechanisms that we could explore.
Thank you. We'll turn to Sarita's group. Sarita and Mark.
Hi, everyone. We had an excellent discussion also, like other groups. And one example from Venezuela was the food was created as a common ground for the host and the Venezuelans to work together in seeing differences in the coming ahead. So they're trying to work on a project. Our group discussed that the impact of COVID was on food and health system was immense, and it is being tested. So we need to develop resilience to carry things forward. And one major things that our group pointed out was that we need to start things to change from individual and organization level. And it can even start at the neighborhood. But we need to assess what works, what challenges that COVID has posed, and work on that at the individual and organization level. At the same time, there is an window opportunity for ceasefires happening, and global conflicts are decreasing to some extent. We need to start on investing on good things and build social capital. The concrete action that Rotary Peace Fellows can offer is the framework that we have of positive peace with the 8 pillars, and that's what Peace Fellows can contribute, is what our group discussed mainly. Our focus was on designing strategies, and guidelines is the current need. Thank you. I'll come back if there is any more on my group may add.
I think we won't have time for additional points, but do put your comments and we'll circulate. It seems like we've been very productive tonight. We'll turn to the final group, Jess.
So we talked a lot about the challenges that we're facing at the moment with vulnerable people being impacted by food insecurity through COVID. There were some small silver linings with that around collaboration that's being prompted between agencies. But, you know, we sort of recognize that actually this is a really conflict creating space at the moment for a lot of the communities that we're working with in Bangladesh, in Argentina, and in Australia. In terms of what Rotarians can do, we also, like many other groups, talked about the fact that most Rotarians meet for meals, for meetings, and also for district conferences, and that can be something that that people can use to make a change, whether it's through making a declaration or a decision to sustainably source food, or to locally source food, or to make a partnership with local farmers. That's a way that they can make a positive contribution, but also to maybe turn some of the efforts that are currently directed towards hospitals and medics, just embracing also very vulnerable communities and looking at food aid as well as other forms of aid.
Thank you. I've seen this one question here. Others seeing a current conflict between hygiene and waste, now with a preference for sanitary single-use containers over reusable containers. I'll open, I'm going to take a kind of a risky move and open it up, maybe see if anyone has a comment. Does anyone have a comment they'd like to make? If so, can you unmute? Or if not, I can ask our speakers.
But I'll say, just to get us started, this is Anna Patel, that I think that there is a huge opportunity, as Jessica just said, for Rotary clubs to model both interacting with local organic food sources, to bringing in diverse kinds of food from the community. So maybe having a different restaurant to supporting the local economy, but also to really being intentional and thoughtful about the use of plastics and single-use kinds of things that end up in our landfills. So that's something a Rotary Club can do. I love the idea of some kind of Rotary world level discussion about that, but that is something clubs and districts can make a choice on right away. And then certainly in the United States, I would argue that there are many examples of not being intentional and thoughtful about food, of only having sort of meat-based meals available for the lunches. I think there's a huge amount of creativity that could happen there that would both support local economies and make people think a little bit more about the food and the waste.
Great. There was one more comment, but I think I'll just leave that, and we have 2 minutes. So just to kind of round things up, I think what's come out is that we're not talking about spectacular changes to our lives that we're trying to make today. We're trying to change everyday habits as a start, and it's not to undermine the value of changing everyday habits, about being mindful about inequalities, stereotypes, waste, a lot of talk about buying local, not just as a form of supporting farmers, but that this is what we must do in a current COVID situation, and improving our current food systems. And when we buy local, also buying from perhaps local social enterprises, so that the money can go back into the work that the community does. And also talk about reducing plastic where possible. So these are all very good suggestions, and I'm looking to continue this discussion once we send out these the notes from tonight's discussion. Thank you for everyone's engaging involvement today, and the facilitators for doing a fantastic job, and the speakers and Bill for contributing. As I mentioned, over the coming days, you will get a link for this recorded session. We will also be having another webinar for those who want to continue this discussion. Next week, the theme is education and peace. The following week, it will be xenophobia. So do stay in touch, or look to Eventbrite for the Rotary alumni webinars, and join us if you can. So in closing, I think there's a lot of involvement from Rotarians and Rotary Peace Fellows today. We want to bring hope with what we're doing, and in not in the spectacular necessarily, in every parts of our lives. And we can do this by making small changes in our everyday practices, even in the things we've grown accustomed to. So as we respond to the pandemic, I look forward to hearing more about the many ways and ideas you're coming up with, and generating new ideas and taking action together. So thanks for joining us, and blessings to you all. Bye.